Oh, hi, Gideon. I've been looking for someone to try out my new mirror maze. Then again, you're an idiot. That's the end of the sentence.
Hello, it's me, the Pineapple Grenader, and welcome to another episode of the Pineapple Grenader Talks About Stuff show. So if you know anything about me, or if you've seen any of the thumbnails on my videos, then you know that I really love drawing. I love drawing and creating fan art and also creating original characters and original stories. One of my big dreams is to create a big, crazy universe full of characters that people can get really attached to and stories that astound and wonder people. But sometimes it feels it's really hard to really reach that goal of making amazing stories and create stuff that people can really gravitate to. So one of the things I decided I wanted to do for this year was to start small. Rather than trying to make my big, grand magnum opus, I'd create something small and simple so that I could learn the basics of making stories, or more specifically, making comics. So one of the things I want to start doing, as a sort of a yearly tradition, is just going over all the things I was able to create in regards to comics. So this will be the first year I'm doing this project, so I am going to discuss the big comic project I've been working on for 2023, which is this weird fan comic thing, Molly McGee Image of the Week. So this video will be discussing, how I came up with the concept, my progress in regards to developing my art style, and also some plans of some stuff I want to do in the future. So, before we get started, I do have to give a warning. There is going to be a lot of spoilers for several Disney Channel shows, as well as spoilers for my own comic. I will be going over all of the comics that I posted this year, but I'll also be going over the stuff that I drew this year, which involves stuff that will likely be posted next year. So, you can stick around, you can get a sneak peek of the comic, but hey, if you want to be surprised, well, this is your warning. So, I think the first thing I want to do is probably go over some of my past attempts at creating comics. So, I've actually been making comics for a really long time. Well, I've been drawing for like a super long time. It was actually my brother who actually started making comics before I did. He used to get those those marble notebooks, and he used to draw comics in those. And then one of the things we started doing was kind of collaborating, making comics together. We came up with our own little characters, and we just get notebooks, and what we do is that we'd create one big story, and then each page would kind of be its own little comic strip. So there'd be one big story arc and a bunch of little stories. And so that was my first experience making comics. But then back then there wasn't any expectations of me ever showing this to anybody or it being famous or whatever. I just drew it for fun, and it was fun. A while back, when I was starting getting into middle school and stuff, and I was starting to really start to get inspired, right? I started coming up with a lot of different concepts for characters, right? And one of the concepts I had was a character called Evo, who eventually got changed to Razorback, but that's a whole different story, but I'll elaborate that in a bit. Okay, so one of the early concepts I had for a comic was for a character called Evo. I think it's really hard to kind of pin down the actual inspirations for the comic. I think I want to say that when I was visiting my library, I read a lot of manga, a lot of just random manga, and I was really fascinated with the chibi art style. So I wanted to kind of create a comic series that just was entirely comprised of that art style. So I do have the actual story I have for the concept of the character. I think originally the idea was it was supposed to be a story about this depressed emo kid and his ghost friend, and the whole comic was about him trying to impress this girl that he liked. And then that evolved into just being this story about this weird random dude. The emo dude turned into a weird wacky green-haired dude, and then the ghost turned into a parrot. And it just became this really weird, silly, wacky comic where, characters were breaking the fourth wall and stuff all the time. And I don't know, I was just drawing on printer paper, coloring with colored pencils, and lining stuff with ballpoint pens. And I was able to convince my dad to help me get, I think it was a Comic Skater account. I don't remember. I know it was Comic Fury, I think. And I was able to make my own site, and I was able to post I think 4 or 5 comics, I think. And I don't know, I just it was weird because I remember when I first posted stuff, people actually responded to the comic and stuff, and they said that they liked the art, and that was a really rewarding experience but they just said that they had a hard time reading the dialogue, mostly because the scanner that I used at my school was honestly not all that great, and that inspired me to get a tablet. So for my 15th birthday, I got a Wacom tablet, and I also got the first black and white box set of Scott Pilgrim, and the rest is history. I just kept on making comics. Scott Pilgrim did have like a massive influence in how I approach the comic as a whole. So when I decided I wanted to go digital, I actually decided to do a little shift on the character. I wanted to try and make him more action focused. So one of the things I was trying to do was trying to give the comic more of a focus. I wanted to maybe try and steer away from sort of the lol random sort of thing I was doing earlier, but I was having a hard time kind of getting a handle on the program. So I started off doing a lot of really simple stuff, like, drawing characters, character designs and stuff. But even when I was trying to use the program that I used was a Manga Studio. Before it was Clip Studio Paint. Yeah, that was the program I was using before, and a lot of my earlier stuff it was kind of hard, and the program itself was also kind of a little bit difficult for me because it was the first time I was using a tablet at the time. But school and stuff just got the better of me, and I wasn't really able to do anything with the concept. The character has evolved a lot since I made those comics, and the story that I still actually want to do the comic. I still have intentions of doing stuff with the comic, but the character has changed so much, and the cast of characters surrounding the character have changed so much that I don't know. When I realized the scope of what I wanted to do, I ended up kind of just like giving up on that, and I wanted to do something else. So there was actually another comic I did after this, which is a little bit more successful because I was able to develop an actual full issue of the comic, and that comic is Mighty Misfits. So I had this concept a while back. This was probably developed when I started getting onto social media, and I was introduced to the concept of people making characters without stories. At first I thought that was really weird, right? Why would you create a character without any story attached to them, right? So I just thought that concept was weird, but then when I thought about it myself, I realized that I had a lot of characters that I came up with really early on that didn't have stories, right? So I had this character named Patea, who's this pineapple kid. He was supposed to be the quote-unquote mascot because I noticed on social media a lot of people had mascots, so I made a mascot for my own quote-unquote brand, and so he didn't have a story either. I noticed when I was on Tumblr a lot during Halloween, everyone drew witches, so I ended up drawing my own witch character, and they didn't have a story, so they ended up just kind of being in the back burner. I remember for a college project, we had to come up with a character, and we had to use a random concept generator, and I came up with this character who was who was a squid that had a TV forehead, and I named him 4K because he had a CRT TV, so that was a weird pun. And he didn't have a story attached to him, and so my idea was that I wanted to have all these characters come together and be a part of something. And I was coming up with this idea because these characters were essentially abandoned characters, and I was also going through some stuff at the time. The story was really about these characters feeling like failures, feeling like their dreams weren't really being able to be achieved. It was essentially kind of a story about superheroes that people didn't care about, and so that was kind of the core concept. My early story was really about sort of the weird dynamic that they have with this world, and also kind of just the way how weird this story was. So the thing that incited me to make the first issue, or to get started on the issue, was that there was a zine that was coming out that would allow comic artists to feature their comics in the zine and advertise them and stuff. So I thought, hey, what if I just got this really good push for my comic where I put my comic in the zine, right? And once it's in the zine, people will see it and it'll be advertised and stuff, and I can gain some momentum in developing this concept. So because I had that hot seat, I was able to start developing the concept pretty quickly, And I came up with this one story, which was, I don't know, it's kind of weird in retrospect, but like the idea was just that, like, you know, there's this like weird like piggy bank guy, and the amount of coins he has inside of him is really uneven, so he's going on this weird rampage. But there's this bad guy who wants to keep him destroying stuff. So the team is like working together to like try and calm him down, while also trying to get around this other villain who's trying to keep the monster from continuing to destroy stuff. I made this project in Medibang Paint. By this point, I had enough experience making stuff in Medibang Paint, so I had an easier time working with it, but I also lacked the fundamentals to make something that felt kind of coherent. I knew early on that like making a comic would be kind of hard, so I was kind of settling on the idea of having characters be in limited palettes. So what I ended up on was kind of like this weird orange-yellow palette for the comic, and all the characters became blank. I originally had like, you know, like a 3-tone color scheme or whatever, or something like that for like the color palettes. Yeah, so I ended up like missing the deadline. I still finished the comic because I just finished it, but like that momentum was like completely gone. And by that time I was like, you know, I was in community college then, and like, I don't know, I didn't have a whole lot of time to do stuff. So the comic was just kind of like, I just didn't have that momentum, right? I definitely tried making more like single comics and stuff, and I think I did make some pretty decent progress artistically in regards to that one. I was doing a better job at handling the concept of limited palettes. I was also doing a better job of creating backgrounds. Let me see here. There's one comic that I really like. I like a lot. You see here. Yeah, so I'm having him like walk down the street to like this pizza place for lunch or whatever. And I don't know, I was doing like that thing I do with like my art where like I have a lot of like these weird overlays and stuff. It's like kind of a rudimentary concept because I'm doing a lot of texture work, but that texture work doesn't have a whole lot of direction. But at the same time, I was really happy with the I was happy with the way the comic looked, the message of the comic. It felt like it kind of tied down what I wanted to do thematically with the concept. And I'm not sure how good of a job I did with the background, but overall I am still pretty happy with the way this one turned out. I think out of all the comics I did in this early era of Mighty Misfits, I was pretty happy with this one, actually. So yeah, once again, time just kind of got the better hand of me, like the better end of me, and I wasn't really able to do anything with that concept anymore with that. Similar to Evo and Razorback, this one definitely changed a lot. A lot of characters, their character designs have changed, the cast has grown, all that stuff. These are concepts I'm still planning on doing stuff with in the future. I just want to get some more time time and experience under my belt. But yeah, that was another one that I started and kind of failed at. Well, not failed, but just I wasn't able to continue that momentum. And the last project that I was actually gearing up to do before I did Molly McGee was it was called Whatever Forever. So I guess another thing that you need to know about my projects is that my idea is that I want them to be kind of a part of like a larger universe, and all of these different like stories are part of like a continuous timeline, right? So there are some stories in my larger universe or whatever that like are kind of important, but they don't really need to constitute being like this huge like 50-story saga or whatever. They could just be like 2 stories or 1 story or 5 stories. So my general idea was that, at this point I realized that I'd failed to make 2 webcomics, so I already recognized by this point that I should probably like start small, right? So I decided I'm going to do a comic anthology, right? I'm going to make a collection of separate stories, right? I knew what stories I wanted to tell. I knew the characters I wanted to write about. I had a basic breakdown of the different stories I wanted to do and everything. So I started working on the first story, which involved this character called Morphhead, who lived on the moon, and she didn't have any arms, but she could like transform her head into like different shapes and stuff. And I was trying to like write sort of like a five or six story like comic essentially, like 5 stories devoted to this character. And I realized that like when I was doing this, I didn't really have like a good framework as to how I want to start like scripting, right? So one of the things I did was I started doing like kind of like thumbnails, right, of the comic and stuff, but breaking down like the specifics of like how I wanted the dialogue to be written and stuff, where I'd place that dialogue, right? A lot of that stuff just like I couldn't get a handle on that, right? So like I guess my thing for me was basically like I recognized that I had a better foundation, right? My expectations were lower, right? I understood how much I wanted to write with the story, but the actual execution, right? Because like, you know, I've been drawing for a really, really long time, but creating something like sequential was the issue, right? And planning that out, right? So I recognized, and even by this point too, I was also having a lot of anxiety about, you know, my art, right? You know, it's very easy for me to get discouraged, especially like on social media. I'm not exactly the most popular person, right? And one of the recurring things that definitely had plagued me through almost all of these projects was just this idea of putting so much work and effort into something that people really wouldn't care about, right? I just didn't like the idea of failing, right? I didn't like the idea of creating my dream project and it being essentially a failure, right? So that kind of crippled that initial project, and now it's kind of on the back burner. I still want to make comics, so my main thing was that I need to start small, right? I need to like go even smaller than this, right? And I just need to just make stuff, right? Like I need to get that that muscle, like I need to develop the comic muscles. So like I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna start small. I'm just gonna, you know, try and do something really small scale, right? So yeah, I guess now we can finally talk about Molly McGee, right? How long have I been rambling on for? Like what, 20 minutes almost? Crazy. Okay, so why Molly McGee, right? Why Molly McGee, right? Why this weird format, right? I should probably actually give a synopsis of what this comic is, right? So the general idea I have for this comic, it is a Molly McGee fan comic. It's also a Disney Channel fan comic. It's a crossover, and the main gimmick of the comic is that Molly is the one who's making the comic. This is her fan comic, and everything she draws comes to life. So she essentially has complete control over the multiverse, and antics ensue. So that's kind of like the general concept, but that concept is developed pretty wildly in a short amount of time. I think one of the things that really inspired Molly McGee was probably my early plans for Whatever Forever. So the comic anthology originally wasn't going to be only original comics. It was actually going to be comprised of original and fan comics. So I had a lot of ideas for like random fan comics and stuff. Like just like random like short comic strips about like TV shows that I was watching. I actually had a lot of comic ideas for the Owl House, but I realized like later on that like I didn't want that to mess up the vibe of the comic, because a lot of my original stuff are like a little bit more like drama centric, more action, more sincere, whereas all my fan comic stuff was like really insincere and ironic and stuff. So I just feel like it kind of like messed up with the vibe or whatever. I didn't want to do like a separate comic for fan comic stuff. So a lot of those ideas were just kind of in the back burner. While I was considering the idea of doing like a separate like fan comic, I was watching the first season of Molly McGee, and I was also creating the scratch video. So early on when I was like watching Molly McGee, I was like into it, right? But I wasn't like into it, right? If you asked me like a while back, right, when we were in like the trenches of season 1, I'd probably tell you that like Molly McGee is like super mid, right? Like she's the queen of mid, right? The scratch video was essentially a consolation, right? I recognized that there was like this special something that Molly McGee had, right? That made it like this really fun show to watch. But I was having a hard time really deciphering it, right? And like I didn't want to just like make a video about like, oh, you know, right, this show is just kind of bland, like milquetoast, whatever, right? Because that's not fun, right? Because I didn't really feel that way, right? I liked the show. The show is fun. The show is, you know, cool and whatever, right? But I also felt like it was kind of lacking something, right? So I kind of made the scratch video as kind of like a consolation, right? I wanted to like, because for me, like I don't like writing about stuff that I hate, right? Or stuff that I think is lame, right? and I liked Molly McGee, right? So my thing was that, like, I just wanted to write something. I wanted to write something nice about Molly McGee, right? So I decided I'd write a video about how I thought Scratch's character was layered, right, and had a lot of complexities. And I think by proxy of me putting so much effort into trying to find the good qualities of the show, it definitely made me enjoy the show on a much bigger layer, a much grander, not grander, but like a much stronger effect, right? Like I like the show more by trying to put so much more effort into appreciating it. I can't say I'm doing a pretty good job of figuring out what makes Molly McGee really good, because I don't know, I don't want to say that my opinion hasn't changed, right? I do think that, like, there is more bespoke elements of Molly McGee. It's not just like this generic thing, but I do think that, like, it has this, like, specific X factor that I can't really describe, right? It's so mad weird. Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna do this. What if I just went on, like, a weird unhinged rant about an episode I don't like, right? Because I need to prove a specific point, right? Yeah, because the thing is that, like, there are, like, I like a lot of Molly McGee, right? I think it's the thing about me is that, like, there are episodes that I think are kind of, like, that are kind of lame, right? Either because I feels like a concept is undercooked, or a story doesn't feel complete. But there is some episodes that actually kind of, like, just, like, straight up annoy me, right? But I can't really say that, like, I hate them, because, like, Molly McGee has that weird X factor that I keep on talking about. There's the one episode that made me really like Darryl, but it's also the episode I hate the most, and it's the one where he turns into a ghost, right? And it's like, man, this is so lame. So, like, it's, I don't know, because my main big critique back in the day was just that, like, I felt that a lot of Molly McGee's character concepts were really undercooked, right? Because, like, you know, I grew up on Disney Channel, right? So, like, I know all of the character, like, the characters, like, I don't want to say stereotypes, but, like, archetypes, right? And I felt like Darryl's was, like, every character in Molly McGee felt like, you know, like, they were like the lesser version of a lot of these concepts, right? So Darryl's supposed to be like the troublemaking rascal, right? But I feel like he's kind of a little bit more benign compared to, like, a lot of the other, like, troublemaker characters in, like, the Disney Channel canon or whatever, right? The Disney Channel pantheon. So this whole thing about him, his, like, you know, like, being a troublemaker is in his blood. It's just who I am, right? I was like, oh, you're just making him out of a molehill, man. It's not a big deal. Like, I don't know, man. Like, maybe people wouldn't be so mad at you if you didn't, like, draw, like, 50-foot, like, caricatures on the wall like a freak or something. I don't know, I just felt like the whole, like, emotional conflict was really contrived, right? And also didn't help that I felt like the foundations of these characters weren't super developed, right? You know what I mean? So the whole thing felt kind of weak, right? But it's also just kind of like having an episode dedicated to Darryl made me really focus on, like, the voice direction for the character and, like, the character design and also the animation. And it kind of made me recognize that, like, wow, this show's, like, really charming, right? Like, it's really fun, right? Like, it's weird, like, I didn't think anything of Darryl, like, before that episode, right? Like, I didn't think anything of him, right? But then, like, after that episode, he kind of became probably one of my favorite characters, and it's weird that, like, I didn't think anything of him, and it's weird that, like, my least favorite episode is the episode that, like, made me appreciate the character, right? And I think that's probably the thing that, like, that's the X factor, is, like, it's a charming show, right? All of, like, the aesthetic elements of the show, like, you know, the animation, the voice direction, you know, the like, all that stuff, like, it congeals into this sort of, like, infectious charm, right? Like, every character feels like someone I want to, like, spend, like a whole week with, right? Like, right? Like, I could watch, like, a 25-minute episode of Ollie doing, like, a dissertation about the history of, like, corn chips or whatever, right? And I'd watch that because, like, I vibe with Ollie, right? Like, I like all these characters, right? And that was kind of just, like, the core of it, right? You know, I just really enjoyed this show, right? And I think when I enjoy something, I want to, like, create something with that, right? So that was the initial idea, right? The core, like, inspiration were probably one of those, like, probably more of those, like, goofy, like, you know, more of those like kind of like goofy like fan comics you see on like Twitter and Tumblr and stuff, right? And I wanted to make something in the vein of that because I felt like there wasn't anything like that for Molly McGee, right? I wasn't like noticing people making comics for it, right? So I wanted to try and make something for that, right? Try and make something like within the vein of that thing, you know, and try and make something for Molly McGee. There are some challenges that came in when I was trying to develop the comic. The first thing was mostly creating in Procreate. I want to say maybe like a year from now, I did get my iPad, and I've been using Procreate. I wanted to use Procreate as a supplement, right? Because, you know, I was starting to have less time to create like these big pieces on a Clip Studio Paint on my computer, right? I didn't want to get Clip Studio Paint on my tablet because I didn't want to pay like a monthly fee or whatever, right? So I decided I was just going to get Procreate, right? And now I barely have any time to make stuff on Clip Studio Paint. So now I'm just like making stuff on Procreate. And while Procreate was really easy to learn, I wouldn't say it's really easy for me to master. There's definitely a lot of tools on Procreate that I feel like they're not super developed, or at the very least I feel like they're missing some tools. I don't feel like I have the full wealth of tools like I have on Clip Studio Paint. And it definitely doesn't feel like it's optimized for making comics, right? So when going into that, it just felt really challenging, right? Like I could make like simple illustrations and stuff, but like getting into like making like more sequential stuff, right? I just felt kind of challenging. Another big thing too that kind of was a hard issue was definitely writing, right? So early on, my idea was that this was going to be kind of like a parody, right? And right now I'm kind of trying to hard pivot myself into more of like a serialized format, more of like a serialized action format. That's something I want to work into when I'm going into 2024, stories like that. So earlier on, I don't know. See, that's probably the weird thing about me, right? Is that like I'm such like I don't have a whole lot of traction on the internet, so I don't have a wavelength as to how people feel about the way I'm writing these characters, right? I'm just writing stuff that I think is really funny, right? But also at the same time, I'm not really explaining myself. I had an idea early on in the year about making an animatic of like the "You Have Uno" meme. I had this funny idea about doing that, but having the characters be replaced with Anne, Luce, and Molly. I had this gag that, like, you know, the two people arguing would be Anne and Molly, right? And the gag would be that these two characters who were supposed to be mediators, these two very amicable people, would be getting into a petty argument, right? And my idea was that Molly would be the one saying that she doesn't have Uno, right? She'd be the instigator, right? And that was kind of a thing that kind of informed the way I wrote the character pretty early on in the comic, was that she was this character who kind of liked messing with people, very much in, like, not in a malicious way, but very in sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of way. That's very much kind of the way I wrote them, especially with that first Anne comic I did a while back, where they're meeting each other for the first time, and Molly calls her hair a wig, right? That kind of is something that kind of informs the character a bit, as her being like this like weird like instigator who likes kind of messing with people, and also being kind of sardonic. It's weird. I don't know. There's parts of me that kind of feel kind of weird about the way I'm writing the character. At least feels a little bit bad, right? Because it kind of makes me feel like I'm kind of I'm not self-aware as to like what makes Molly McGee like a character that people like, right? Like, this kind of feels like the kind of like ironic sort of like internet like humor kind of thing, where it's like you're just doing stuff that's kind of like edgy or whatever just for the sake of it, and it doesn't have any substance to it. Like, I feel like I'm doing a Mario Does Drugs comic, right? I'm not doing anything like I'm doing something that like kind of feels like it's made out of something with a lack of self-awareness for the IP, right? And I don't know, I don't want to say no, right? I really am just making stuff that's funny, right? But I think the part of the thing that is core to that concept of that joke, the thing that builds up that joke, right, is also the characters too. It's like not just the stuff that they're saying, but who's saying it too. One of my favorite comics that I made in this sort of early period was the one with Darryl, and he's talking about like the lollipop, right? Um, I really like that one, but it's also kind of like I always feel really weird about Molly saying she's gonna kill him, right? Because that's not something she would say, but like I just think that that joke is just really funny, and it does make me wonder, right? Like, would this joke be funny if I switched out like Scratch for Molly? I mean, switched out Molly for Scratch, right? Would this joke still work, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of just like one of those things, and the issue is just that like no one's come up to me and said, hey, you know, why are you writing Molly like this? Why are you writing her like this big, weird, antagonistic weirdo? And I don't know. I think it's funny, right? That's just kind of like the short of it, right? It's like, this is just funny, right? And I don't know. I think that's probably one of the things that's kind of frustrating, right? Is that I don't understand why people like this, right? Like, did they think that my writing is funny? Or do they like it because I'm making something that's Molly McGee related and they recognize it, right? I don't understand if like my writing is making people uncomfortable or not, right? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I kind of, in regards to this project, I don't want to say I don't care about people commenting and stuff, right? I don't care about growing on social media or whatever. But I do want to, mostly because, like, you know, I'm making this because that's really the answer to a lot of this stuff, right? I just think these comics are funny, right? But, like, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, I just don't really have an understanding as to whether or not people think, like, me writing these characters out of character is funny, too, right? Another weird thing, too, is really early on, I had a lot of comics that revolved around video games, right? And that was just another one of those weird inside jokes that I thought were kind of weird, like, what if Molly really liked Tekken, right? Wouldn't that be funny? I was watching a video about the history of Tekken, right? And he pulled up some video about someone pronouncing Tekken weird, and it's like, no, that's actually how you're supposed to pronounce it. And that was the genesis of that one weird comic like the third comic I made that involved Molly getting bent out of shape about the pronunciation of Tekken. And that kind of evolved into like a weird thing of writing like comics about Molly liking fighting games. Yeah, I don't know why I can see. The biggest problem with that is that I'm not like an FGC head, right? Like, I have Street Fighter V, right? And I've played like 30 minutes of it. Like, I like watching competitive stuff, but I wouldn't call myself so super knowledgeable of a lot of stuff, right? So I can't make like really deep cut stuff, right, about like these fighting games, right? So that's kind of the reason why I kind of reduced the number of like video game like concepts that I did, right? I don't know. It's weird. It's super weird. Another point of contention, right? At least another thing I think is really weird is probably like the Andrea comics, right? Andrea is really weird in the show, right? Like, I don't know. It's weird. I think the biggest problem with writing the comic is definitely that I'm writing a comic about a TV show that's still going on. With characters that have character development, right? So when I was conceiving jokes about these comics, right, I was still in like the middle of like season 1, right? I do want to say though that like I skipped a good chunk of season 1 episodes, like, and I went straight to the finale. Well, not the finale, but like the last 2 episodes, right? So there's like the one episode where like the McGees lose their house, right? And then like everybody like pitches in and like gets them their house back, and like so does Andrea too, right? And I guess after that they become friends, right? But it's really hard for me to like recognize that they're friends, right? Because like for really a large portion of the show, Andrea's like at worst she's like this really kind of like needlessly malicious person, and at best like she's kind of just oblivious to like the massive amount of destruction that she causes. And it's like, I don't know, it's like she's not like a bad character or a character I don't like, but I think it's like if she had stayed really simple, right, that I wouldn't really be thinking about it too much. But now she's like a character who's grown. She's not super like hostile, right? She's like friends with a lot of these characters, right? And she just had like a really cool, really sweet, endearing episode to get dedicated to her. So it's like, it feels weird like writing comics about like Molly and Andrea hating each other, right? And I kind of recognized that early on too, because I think one of my other favorite comics was the one where like Andrea was talking about how her dad dumped a bunch of toxic waste in the river or whatever. I like that one. I like that comic a lot on several different fronts. I'm happy with like this concept for the art style that I did, with like the limited color palettes and the harsh shadows and stuff. but also it kind of recognizes how I wanted to approach the Andrea Molly comics, right? Where I had this dynamic of like one character kind of being oblivious instead of it being like a intentional malice or whatever, right? And I guess the Tekken comic is kind of written in that same way too, where like Molly isn't intending to try and be mean, right? But like I don't really know where this concept came from. I think a lot of that too was just because like it just felt really weird that I guess they're friends now, right? And I just really liked, like, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of funny for like these characters to kind of like unintentionally kind of cause mayhem for each other, even though like one party is trying to be like well-meaning. Like I had this idea for this comic, right? This one, like the Toxic Waste comic, where I had this idea that like Andrea recognized that Molly likes helping people, right? So she like intends to cause problems on purpose so that Molly has problems to solve, but doesn't recognize that problems are bad, right? So that was a loose idea I had for that comic, right? This idea that like these characters like lack the communication skills to develop an actual relationship with each other. And so that was sort of the general idea I had for the comic, right? These Andrea comics. And I don't know, I think as time passes on, right, it makes it harder because I have a couple of really fun Andrea comics I want to do, but I also kind of want to hard pivot into doing more stuff that's more in line with how she's written now, right? So it makes reading the comics kind of weird, but it also kind of makes writing the comics also equally weird, right? I like this one with the bowling ball where he's dropping the bowling ball on Andrea's head. I thought that one was really funny. I had that joke in my mind for so long, and it's just like, I don't know, I really liked that one. I don't know, I guess that's just been my thing. I think a lot of people like these comics, right? Like, people seem to respond pretty well on like Tumblr and stuff, but I don't know if people think that me writing Molly and Andrea this way is like weird or not, you know? Like, I don't know, it's like, sometimes I wish I could like get critique, right? But like, I don't even know, right? I don't even know if I'd even respond to critique, right? Because I'm writing this for myself, right? If someone actually decided to critique the comic, I'd probably just be like, oh, you don't know anything about art, and I just delete the comic or the comment or whatever, right? I don't know. Yeah, I think the biggest also thing with writing too is definitely writing the other characters, the non-McGee characters, right? I was thinking a lot about how I want to write Dipper, right? The biggest thing that's coming that I'm thinking about now is definitely like the future of the comic, right? Because my whole thing is that like I'm trying to build a story around the gimmick, right? The gimmick that like Molly is writing this comic, right? And that she can draw anything into existence. So I'm kind of like reworking characters around the story, right? So one of the characters I decided to have pretty early on was I wanted to have Dipper be a main character, right? And I was thinking really long and hard about like why I was writing him so angry. I think one of the things I thought about too was I was really attached to the Gravity Falls concept art of like Dipper being like always like super pissed off, right? And I think I kind of like Nelson Mandela affected like my memory of Gravity Falls of like Dipper always being angry. Like, I'm doing a Gravity Falls binge right now, and he does get angry sometimes, but I wouldn't say that it's like a constant state of mind of the character, right? So that can't be his normal state, right? So I think going forward, I was thinking to myself, like, I have to like write a reason as to why he's angry, right? Like, why he doesn't want to be a part of the comic, right? That was kind of my whole like character exploration for the character, is that like, you know, he doesn't want to be a part of like an absurdist fan comic, right? He doesn't want to be here. He just wants to go on regular Gravity Falls adventures, but he keeps on getting roped into this weird nonsense. So there's a lot of stories of like Molly trying to be his friend, and he doesn't want to have any part of it. I think early on I decided I want to try and do some more pivoting more stuff towards trying to rein the characters in a little bit, right? Which is where this one comic I had about the weird nonsense quote in Scratch and Molly came from, because I was like, you know, these comics are getting a little bit surly, right? Like, I don't know. Oh man, the Drive Impact comic, that one's weird. Molly dropping the F-bomb, that's kind of a surreal moment. Probably my best Scratch drawing in the comic and my best Darryl ever, but like, I don't know. This comic's weird. This is based off of I think early on I wanted to do some comics that were like homages to other comics, right? I don't know. And I wanted to do like something that was based off of the the Powerpuff Girls like Applebee's comic. It's like my favorite comic ever. So I thought, oh, it'll be funny since I'm doing all these comics about like Molly liking fighting games. What if I did one about Street Fighter? But I think early on I was like, man, this is kind of weird, right? Like I still think it's kind of funny, but it's like I don't think I could pull off profanity, honestly. Like I think a well executed F-bomb can be really funny, but like I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm the guy who can pull that off, right? Which is frustrating because I think sometimes it can be like the salt to like a fine dish that you're developing, this fine comedy dish, right? But I don't know, it just feels weird. And I think when I was coming up with the concept, I was just kind of like, man, this is kind of weird. These guys are supposed to be like friends, right? This is so weird. I don't know, it's just another really weird one, I think. But yeah, there's another like set of comics that are just kind of like me trying to rein that sort of thing in, trying to write more stories about these characters kind of hanging out. And that's kind of sort of where we get into the stuff like the introduction of Luce and Anne, and the comic, the more introduction of the crossover stuff, right? I had this sort of loose idea of Luce and Anne being kind of like essentially like surrogate big sisters to Molly, I guess, and that's something that's going to develop more in this more serialized stuff I'm doing in the future, where these characters are kind of like, they're characters that like Molly looks up to, right? So I kind of run to right around these characters, essentially like viewing her as kind of like a little sister or whatever. And that's where we get the weird like unhinged comic about Molly considering herself unhinged. This is another one I actually really like a lot. I think I really like this character dynamic I have of like characters kind of trying to rein in Molly's weirdness, right? Or trying to like being able to handle it, right? And like see through all of her like shallow nonsense or whatever, right? I do really like the idea of Molly kind of having an ego, right? And all these other characters having to kind of just deal with it or whatever. I think that's a really fun one. Yeah. What if we talked about art style, right? So I think that's probably the big thing. I think the biggest thing I've probably thought about the most when it comes to writing the comic or developing the comic is probably how I draw the characters, right? I don't know what my deal is, right? For some reason I was really attached to the idea of trying to draw these characters as accurately as possible, and that's annoying because it's very exhausting to try and replicate art styles. But sometimes it's really hard too, because sometimes art styles are really easy, right, to replicate, and if you miss out on specific details, then it stops feeling very true to the character or whatever, right? Let me think, right? I think the way I drew Molly really evolved throughout the comic, right? I drew her sideburns really big for some reason, and I couldn't really get a handle on how I drew her ponytail, right? Like the way I always think about it now is that it's kind of like a scorpion tail, right? But for some reason it's like it has like this weird cut in it. I don't know, it's really weird. I don't know why I didn't have a good handle on how I drew Molly's hair. Yeah, for some reason I had lots of problems drawing Molly's hair. I mean, sometimes I'm able to pull off this look pretty alright, in some comics, I think. But like, I don't know, it's weird too, right? Molly is weird because she's a character I think I can probably draw on command now. Probably like Scratch and Darryl. I think I'm probably gonna need a reference for like Sharon and Pete, right? But like for some reason I have a hard time drawing Andrea, right? I don't know why for some reason I have a hard time drawing Andrea. She's probably the simplest character, right? But maybe that's the big issue, right? Because I feel like Molly has a lot of specific things that make her like iconic, right? Like her eyes, her hair, her big Sonic the Hedgehog shoes. But Andrea is like a little bit more, I don't want to say generic, but definitely simpler than Molly, right? So like, if you don't get those specific fine details right, it's really hard. Oh yeah, Molly's eyes, right? Molly's eyes sometimes can be kind of hard to draw, are deceptively hard to draw, right? So she has that like eye pinch, right? So like, a lot of times I draw from the pinch, right? But it would make the curve going out from the eyes look really weird, right? Because her eyes are like, they're like big ovals, right? But they don't like, it's hard to explain without like showing a picture of it, right? But like, I don't know, like getting that down was kind of important too, right? And like, so that kind of, all this like attention to detail I'm trying to develop is creating kind of a big problem, right? Because like, the closer I get to the art style, right, the more noticeable it gets when I'm getting details wrong. I remember my first Dipper comic, right? I don't know. Early on in this comic, a lot of these comics weren't really comics, but were like old ideas for drawings that I just decided to throw into the comic. But like, one of them I had where like I told myself it'd be kind of interesting if I tried to draw these characters on as close to as on model as possible, right? And I think that's probably where I started learning a little bit more about how these characters are drawn. I like this drawing one, right? Looking back at it now, but like, I kind of don't like it because it just feels really stiff, right? Some of these characters' heads are like really big compared to the rest of their bodies, and like stuff like perspective in regards to how the legs are placed feels kind of weird. I know we're not in the writing section anymore, but I do really like this one specific piece because it actually just really informed a lot about how I wrote these characters, right? This specific drawing was inspired by some Steven Universe movie concept art that I saw of like early versions of Spinel that I was always just like really fascinated by. I don't know, it looks really weird. I don't know why it looks weird. I don't know why it looks weird to me. This weird picture of like Steven feeling kind of awkward about Spinel like opening up for a hug, right? And I was just kind of like, this is such a weird aura that like I want to capture, right? And so that's why I drew that one drawing, that one Molly drawing of like Molly opening up for a hug or whatever. And that just kind of informs the character dynamic I had of like one character trying to develop this friendship and one of them being kind of distant about it. And that also inspired the following comic of Molly trying to hug Dipper and stuff. So yeah, art style. I think it's weird because I used to be able to say I have an art style, right? But spending so much time trying to like draw characters from other art styles, it's like, I don't know, it's really hard, honestly, because like, I think I could probably use Anne as an example. There's one drawing I did pretty recently where I think I do honestly a pretty good Anne face, but I think there's like one really big problem that I think you could probably notice in a lot of my drawings that I've done, is that I don't draw noses, right? I'll draw noses on specific instances where a character like needs it because it's a part of their silhouette, right? Like Pete or Grunkle Stan or Scratch, right? Like those characters have big noses, right? But like, I don't know, it's like you can't not draw them with their noses, right? So like, I run into an issue where like I'm drawing a character honestly as close as accurately as possible, but then like when I decide not to draw their nose, it just kind of looks weird, right? So I'm trying to create a middle ground where I'm trying to be able to express myself through these characters while at the same time trying to make them feel recognizable as who they are. There's been some recent comics I've been developing that feel like they're getting pretty close to that. I drew this one comic on Thanksgiving, this weird Thanksgiving comic that I'm still kind of in the middle of penciling, that I think I just really love the faces on these. And yeah, I don't know, like sometimes I think about how many like rules I'm breaking for a lot of these characters. I'm not super familiar with all of the Molly McGee art style rules, but like I've seen a few of them and stuff like, you know, don't draw segmented teeth, try to keep the faces like not super like realistic or whatever. And sometimes I like breaking that sometimes because I draw I don't like drawing like solid white teeth. I like drawing like segmented teeth in my art styles, so it's like, I don't know, it's really weird, you know, like it's weird. I really love how I drew Dipper in this one. I like the way Dipper looks in this one. It almost makes me feel like, you know, like it doesn't really bother me too much that I'm not drawing him with a nose, because I just really like the way he looks in this one. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my big like art style issue, right? I guess another one too is probably figuring out how I color stuff, right? Because I realized early on that like attempting to do like full color is pretty exhausting, right? I don't have a whole lot of time to make these comics, right? My whole goal was that I just wanted to have these come out weekly, right? so I had to make a bunch of comics in a short amount of time. The Darryl one, I still like the Darryl one a lot, the lollipop one, right? But it was a really kind of I wouldn't say it was challenging, but it was time consuming, right? Because not only was I like figuring out colors for all these characters, but also trying to replicate the backgrounds of the McGee house, right? So that was another thing that was like, it just felt like, I don't know, and I don't want to say I'm bored of like the monochromatic thing I'm doing. I don't want to say it's uninteresting, but I do kind of like, sometimes I wish I could spend more time doing stuff with color and stuff, and trying not to keep things too monotonous. I think one of the big issues I have sometimes, I think, is that I pick colors that are a little bit too dark, right? And it can be kind of hard to read the line art, especially when like there's some line arts that I think are honestly pretty solid, honestly. Yeah, there's like some comics or like some art pieces that I've been doing that like I'm really happy with, like the way I've been progressing as far as my line art is concerned. And that's probably one of the things I've been learning a lot, especially with doing the one story arc I just did, which was mostly just trying to have more of a solid foundation when I'm developing my sketches, right? Oh my gosh, the cover art to the Headlice Saga is like probably like my favorite thing I've done for the comic this year. I just love this piece so much. I love the line art so much, and I think that's really attributed to me having a much more solid foundation for my sketches, so my lines are a lot more confident. I don't know, man, I feel like I could talk all day about this piece. I actually really like it a lot. I don't know, this one really makes me happy, right? Like, I feel like this one was the piece where it's like, I felt like I had a handle on how I wanted to draw these characters, how I wanted them to look, right? And like, I don't know, I don't feel like these characters look weird, you know? I really like the way these characters look at this piece. I'm trying to think. There was, yeah, and then there's the thanks for reading piece I did too. I was really happy with that one. A lot of the characters are kind of like weirdly on model, which once again is kind of exacerbated with my whole nose drawing rule with my art style. But I don't know, I'm still really happy with the way this one looks too, right? Let me think. There's my weird Super Mario RPG picture I drew recently. That probably has my best on-model McGee, I think. My best on-model Molly. I've been dabbling with the concept of trying to draw Molly on model for a while. There's been a couple of practice pieces. Yeah, I think one of the things I've always been really fascinated about is how I draw Molly, right? I tend to draw her like really small and stout. In reality, I keep on forgetting that she's like a string bean. I don't know, it's weird. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that like I draw her with like Anne and Luce a lot, so I want to like accentuate how small she is compared to them, because I'm imagining she's like half their size, right? If I had to draw like a height chart or something, right? So I like accentuate. So like a lot of the like by proxy, like a lot of the other like McGee casts tend to be a lot smaller, right? Like if Molly's like super short, then like Darryl's super short, Andrea's super short. Libby's kind of the same, honestly. But yeah, that was, I don't know. Compared to like the first Dipper Molly drawing I did, I really love the second one I did. Once again, I'm still trying to keep things on model a bit, but like, I just think this one's a little bit more dynamic. I like the line of action on these ones too. The line art isn't as confident, right? And I could probably do some more stuff with like color picking and stuff. I don't know if it's like the way that like the color profile is I have on like some of my my Procreate canvases, but sometimes color picking can be kind of weird. I don't know, maybe it's the references that I have, honestly. I tend to lighten Molly's hair a lot, right? Because in the references it can be really dark. It's not she doesn't have black hair. She just has really dark brown hair. And it can make it really hard when like because I draw my eyebrows like super duper high, right? Especially when I'm doing Molly, right? So like, you know, I tend to like lighten her hair a bit. Also, yeah, I hate this so much, but I mess up her skin tone so much. A lot of that has to do with the way I do like my overlays and stuff. Like I like to do a lot of like textured brushes and overlay them on the picture so I can give it kind of like a painterly like scratchy feel. But I think the problem with that kind of approach is that I always mess up skin tones, especially darker ones. So Molly's actually a lot lighter than sometimes I remember. Her skin tone's a lot lighter, and because I do all those overlays, she ends up looking a lot darker than she actually is. The worst thing too is whenever I have like yellows and greens on those overlays, and they give like they make the characters like skin colors look really weird. I have a few drawings of my OCs, and like there's always like these weird like green yellow patches on their skin that looks really weird, and I'm not really the biggest fan of it. Yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest challenge right now has definitely been figuring out how I want to draw characters, since like, you know, the scope of like the characters is getting so big, right? I don't know. It's sometimes it can be kind of challenging. Right now, I'm in the midst of doing a whole bunch of comics about Hunter, right? So the biggest challenge has been figuring out how I draw this character, right? One of the things I've been doing has been doing these like doodle pages, where I just do a whole bunch of like random drawings of characters, just to try and figure out how I want to draw them. This was like kind of the first instances of drawing Molly's mom a lot, because I was trying to figure out how to draw her for a specific moment in the first arc, right? And that was the whole thing too. I remember I was doing a whole bunch of drawings of like Cricket and Hop Hop and Sasha and stuff. People really like this one specifically for some reason. I mean, I like it too. I really like this drawing of Hop Hop in this corner here freaking out. These are my first drawings of like Hop Hop like ever, right? And I think I did a pretty good job on these ones. I think he kind of accentuates a lot of the positive qualities of my art style, that sort of dynamism. I really like the idea of drawing a lot of these characters, especially characters from like the more serious fantasy shows, as cartoony, super cartoony. So that's kind of the thing I've been wanting to do a lot of, unifying the sort of the general tone of a lot of these shows. So I'm happy with this one Hop Hop drawing. Actually, there's another like set of Hop Hop drawings I've been doing for a comic that's probably going to be coming out early next year. I don't know, I really love this one. I love these Hop Hop drawings I did for this one comic. I wish I made the coloring lighter, because it's really hard to see the actual line art, but like, I don't know, I'm really in love with these specific Hop Hop drawings. There's another Amphibia comic I did too. I was really happy with the Marcy drawings too. I really simplified the outfit, but I just really like the way it looks, honestly. I don't know. This is another, like, I think this is probably also my best Sasha too. I'm trying to see what's some other, like, because I guess since we're on this like big ride of like talking about stuff I liked, I like this one Dipper Molly comic I did. This is another one where I feel like I'm really happy with the art style too. I like these weird Molly drawings. I think they're really weird. I'm also really happy with this Dipper too. I don't get his face right, this face shape. But overall, in general, I like how stretchy and bouncy the style is. I kind of like how like the black fills for the mouths look. I might do that more in the future, but I don't know if I want to continue doing the monochromatic stuff. There are like a series of there's three sets of comics that like I'm just not happy with as far as the art style is concerned. There's the Friend in a Hand is Worth Two in the Bush one. I don't like those scratch drawings. I think his face is too small, and I'm not really a big fan of the Molly here. I don't know if I'm really a big fan of like the one like explosion one I did early on. I think the joke is funny, but these Mollys just kind of look weird. Once again, she has these really big sideburns. I'm also not a big fan of Scratch in this one too. I'm kind of okay with the Woodchuck one. I like the Scratch drawings. I like they're really stretchy and dynamic. I think the Molly in the last panel is kind of weird, but I think my favorite one of this one is probably the Molly in the second panel, the top right. It's pretty good Molly. I don't like the hamburger one. The joke is funny, but like I just don't like the art in this one. It's just not my favorite at all. And I don't like the math one. The math one looks weird. I don't like it. It looks weird. It's weird. I'm trying to think like I still love like the Andre one, the one with the toxic waste. That's like my favorite Andrea, but for some I don't know why I can't draw Andrea for some reason. It's weird. I don't know why I can't draw her so well. It's super weird. Oh man, you know what? I might break this down maybe when I get into like the Headlice arc. There's a lot of really good drawings in like the Headlice arc, especially the back half, right? I love the way I draw Anne in this one. There's one when I get into when they're just about to get into their argument. I love this Anne face I made. It does kind of feel like it's something that maybe a face that she'd make in the actual show, and I'm just really happy with how that one turned out. There's a lot of really good Anne drawings in this arc, honestly. I love Sprig in this one, this top one. I think I drew him really well in this one. I'm actually also pretty happy with these Sharon drawings too. I remember for the longest time I was stuck on like the middle section where like Molly like storms up to her room and like her mom comforts her. I just thought this part was really cringe, and I was just like, man, I can't draw this. It's gonna look so bad. But I don't know. I think this is probably my favorite. I don't know. There's a couple of comics I'm doing early on with Sharon that I think are kind of fun. This weird like Mortal Kombat arc I'm doing. I think these Sharons are pretty cute. I like the one in the back half where like Darryl shows up. Though these aren't my finest Darryls. I think my favorite Darryl has to be the Drive Impact comic. Gotta find it. Wait. Yeah, I think the first panel is probably like my favorite Darryl. I think the subsequent Darryl is kind of gross, but like I don't know. I think my favorite thing about Darryl is probably drawing his eyes. I think they're a fun challenge, and I always kind of like how, and when I get them right, they look really nice. So I'm happy about that. You know what? Yeah, you know what we could probably do, because I've been yammering on for a pretty long time. I think we could probably just get started on talking about the first story arc, which was the Headlice story arc. So yeah, I think what I wanted to do really early on was I was thinking to myself, I came up with the idea of Molly drawing the comic as an idea, sort of like a joke that would continuously run throughout the comic, right? So like if I drew a comic of Molly like putting her like getting chased by an alligator or something, right? There'd be like a double joke on top of that, because it'd be like, oh, Molly's the one who's writing the comic, right? She's writing herself into all these situations, right? So everything is contrived, right? That was kind of like the main core gag that I came up with pretty quickly, right? When I was actually drawing the comics, I was like, oh, it'd be funny if like in the back of your head, whenever like something stupid is going on, you go, oh, well, Molly drew that, right? She's the one who's creating all of this conflict, right? All of this stuff is it's like artificial and fabricated, right? So that was kind of like the main joke, and so I wanted to draw something that kind of accentuated that joke, right? I still don't know if like this gag is super clear or not, this concept of like Molly having an effect on the universe. I'm probably gonna have to like write a comic about that, like a quick little like strip about that, because like I don't know how clear that is to anybody. But yeah, that kind of was the conceit of the Headlice Saga, was trying to make something that was kind of like an encapsulation of this really silly concept of Molly being like this all-powerful like creator who can affect the universe, and using that power to like make a really stupid joke at everyone's expense. So yeah, that was kind of like, that's also like the first instance of cricket in the comic too. Not the biggest fan of these cricket drawings. I do some better cricket drawings in the future. But yeah, this is like the first instance of someone mentioning that Molly is the one drawing these comics. I think my biggest issue, like my biggest challenge going in, was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the backgrounds, right? Because I was getting to the point where like I wrote all these jokes. I drew and lined all the characters, and I didn't figure out how I wanted to color. The cover for this arc was something I drew separately, right? I just drew it and I was like, oh, I really like this, and like I realized the way that I framed all the characters and stuff really informs the arc itself, right? Because like essentially Molly is kind of the bad guy in this comic, right? She's creating this story that everyone's kind of suffering from, and she's not recognizing that everyone's kind of annoyed by her. And so I thought, oh wait, this works really well as a cover. So when I decided to go for like that blue color scheme, I decided to have that inform the color scheme of the comic arc. I'm also really happy with these Mabel drawings in the next page too. This was like probably my first time I drew Mabel. I still was trying to figure out how I want to approach drawing Gravity Falls characters. I think the one thing I don't like is just kind of how stiff sometimes I can draw Dipper, right? And it's something I'm trying to work around, trying to draw characters not from icons but from shapes, right? Because I'm drawing like, oh, this is like, you know, these are the lines you draw to make a hand, this is the lines you draw to make an eye or the body or something, and not like, okay, I'm drawing the body from a rectangle shape or a circle shape, you know, or like, but like, I'm not drawing characters from shapes but from icons, right? And it's something I kind of want to fix. Despite that, I'm still really happy with these Dipper and Mabel drawings. This is probably some of the first like Hop Hop and Sprig drawings I did. I'm also not the biggest fan of Anne in this comic. In this one particular page, right? It's another one of those one where like I'm drawing the character from icons but not from shapes, right? So from that, it's like it feels like she looks a lot more stiff than she probably should. It is something that kind of affects a lot of some of these characters, and you can also see that too with the way I decide to pose like some of these characters, right? So like if we get to like something like the third page with like Ida and Luce, right? Their posing isn't super dynamic as it is with Molly, right? I actually really love this Molly drawing, so much actually, and I don't know. I think it's just a testament to how comfortable I am drawing her compared to Ida. Ida was kind of a challenge, honestly, but I still kind of like a lot of these Ida drawings, honestly. I love these Anne drawings too. She seems so like a distressed by this entire concept. It's really funny. I also love this weird Scratch drawing I did. I don't know why he's here. He's so done with everything. It's really funny. I think the crown jewel of this comic definitely has to be the Phineas and Ferb section. I think it's like the pinnacle of how weird this concept is, of Molly drawing a comic about everybody getting head lice, and then like everyone's just like, no, we don't want head lice or whatever. I don't know. This is also another one where I could have benefited from drawing backgrounds. I definitely had the idea of drawing the backyard with like the trees and stuff, you know. I guess in my mind it's like this comic was mostly focused on like dialogue, right? So having a whole lot of backgrounds probably wasn't super necessary, but it's definitely something I want to fix in the future. Oh man, the middle part is probably like the big challenge, right? This one where like Molly just storms into the house was like a big challenge. I was trying to like reference the house from memory, right? I didn't have like a pretty good idea as to how the house was structured, so I was just coming up with a lot of like weird stuff. I did know that Molly's room is in the attic, so I had that one scene of her mom opening the door up to the attic, right? I don't know. I don't mind this Molly drawing though. This one I just kind of cleaned up the sketch a bit. I didn't do any line art for it because I was kind of really intimidated. I am really happy with this first panel, with the foreshortening on Molly slamming the door opening, and then like the perspective of like her back leg. I like that one a bit actually. I don't mind that. But this was definitely like, I was drawing this with I was kind of just really scared of messing up drawing Molly's mom. I just didn't want it to look weird. Yeah, and also this whole bit, right, where she's like talking, because I don't know, this was another one of those concepts where it's like, oh, like I kind of wanted to build on like stuff that happened in the show, right, where like, oh, Molly's mom likes to draw. I'm writing a story about Molly being an artist, right? Well, maybe they can like talk about that stuff. And so that was kind of the thing I wanted to do with this page. For the longest time, I just didn't finish this page. This was probably one of the last pages I did before I got to the ending, right? Because I was so intimidated with messing up, right? And looking like a big cringe lord. So like, I don't know. There are some problems though. There's a whole bunch of weird empty space. I had this idea of maybe doing like an open panel, right? Of Molly like continuing to draw at the bottom of the page, but I kind of just gave up on that because I had to figure out how I wanted to approach her desk, and also by proxy how her desk would be placed in relation to her room. I still have to figure out how I'm going to like lay out backgrounds, especially with like the McGee house and stuff, but I just didn't have that stuff figured out, so now there's just a weird empty void at the bottom there for some reason. I went over this Anne stuff, I think, with the gold teeth. I don't know why that's a joke that I decided to settle on, of like Anne being really obsessed with the gold teeth for some reason, but I do house some really fun sprig drawings. The next page doesn't have like my favorite Sasha drawings, but I do like this joke though. It's very funny. I like this page too a lot. The next page, it has some really fun I really like the third panel. I really like this face that Anne makes. It just kind of feels like something that she'd make in the show, and I'm really happy. I also really like how I did with the background at the end when they're starting to do their argument. I saw this one drawing, I can't find it, but like they're making like this sort of like radial design with like squiggles and stuff. And I just got really fascinated, and I started using it in a couple of drawings. And I also used that in the cover for this arc. I don't know. I was also really happy with this next page with Luce. I like her playing on a Nintendo Switch. I also wanted to keep a couple... I had this idea that they're hanging out in Molly's room, right? So Anne's like sitting on a beanbag. They all have socks on because they take their shoes off when they go into the house. So that was another detail I wanted to keep in, because like that's something that everyone does whenever they come into the McGee house. They take their shoes off. So I wanted to keep that detail in. I also just like this whole bit about like Anne being annoyed that they're still in the story arc. Like nobody's having fun, and you don't know why you don't know why it hasn't ended yet. I don't know. I'm just really happy with how this concept came out, and I just like this idea of like this whole thing developed under like a misunderstanding, right? That like everyone just isn't in communication with each other. I don't know. I had a lot of fun making this comic. I hope a lot of people also liked it too. You know, I hope I'm making something that's like interesting and original. And yeah, I made this as sort of a foundation for the future, right? So in my mind, my idea was that I wanted to explore this dumb joke that I was making much further, right? This idea that like Molly has this massive effect on, you know, the universe that she inhabits, right? That she's able to create art, and that art like has the ramifications for lots of different worlds and stuff. It was just a very funny concept that I just wanted to like stretch further, right? Also, people are going to be referencing getting head lice. That's just going to be a thing that they're not going to let Molly like live down. They're going to let her know how much they hate this whole thing all the time. But yeah, that's kind of like the whole core of the comic going forward, is this idea of Molly like having like this immense amount of power, right? And like her like, and sort of the relationship she develops with all these other characters, right? This is something that hasn't been explored yet, but one of the things that I wanted to go forward is this idea of like Molly as a fan, right? Like I had this idea that like all of these different shows are TV shows in her universe. So when she's seeing these characters for the first time, it's like they're like these idols that she's excited to see for the first time. So one of the things that gets kind of established in this first arc is sort of like her relationship with everybody, with like, you know, with like Anne and Luce and Dipper and stuff, and how they view her and stuff. So yeah, that's the Headlice arc. I'm really happy, right? This has been like 13 pages of a connected story, right? I feel like that would have been such a massive challenge in the past, but I'm happy I was able to achieve something like that going forward. Coming up in 2024, I do have this one little like three-page stint about Molly trying to get her mom into Mortal Kombat. This was actually supposed to be like a part of a larger story I had. I don't know, it's a whole thing about like Sharon getting harassed by random video game characters, reminding her of their like release dates and stuff. I had this one joke about about Elephant Mario or something. Is like gonna be like, wowie zowie, 252 days until Super Mario Brothers Wonder, and like I had this really dumb joke about that, but like as the days passed on and we got close to the release date, it just wasn't nearly as funny. And my idea was that like this was gonna lead into some weird story where like Molly like was trying to get her mom into Mortal Kombat, so she like asked Scratch to like pretend to be these video game characters to like mess with her or whatever. And one of the things I've been doing a lot more of has been like kind of like trimming down story concepts, right? So I thought to myself, okay, what's the most interesting part of this concept, right? My thing is just like, one, it's Molly being into Mortal Kombat, and two, trying to convince her mom to play, right? So rather than like trying to contrive a big story about that, I decided to just make 3 comics about that concept, right? And I'm exploring that idea with like the next arc that I'm doing. It wasn't supposed to be an arc. What I'm actually doing right now is I'm trying to like pencil all of my comics before I start my big serialized one, which is going to be like a big Molly Dipper story. So I thought to myself, okay, so I have a lot of I want to write stories about Hunter, right? I think Hunter has the potential to be a really funny character, especially in this context of like this weird like absurdist parody thing. So I wrote a lot of stories about Hunter, right? I had this first gag of like him showing up at Molly's house for some reason, right? And he's like just randomly doing chores and stuff, and everyone's kind of freaked out. I had this other story about Sasha, Hunter, Seuss, and Sylvia hanging out for some reason, and like for some reason like Sasha and like Hunter getting like a big fight, and everyone has to work together to try and get them to get along. The story itself wasn't super like developed, but I just kind of like, I thought the concept of Sasha and Hunter having a rivalry was really funny. So what I did was I just decided to just make a whole bunch of jokes about them like beating each other up, with like the big punchline being that like they're actually friends and they just like fighting. I don't know. I don't know if the comic is going to be lined and finished by the time I start editing this, but at least as far as these pencils are concerned, I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I think they're just like really funny. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing for the future right now. I can't really speak it to exactly like what I want to do for, you know, the serialized stuff, mostly because like I think it isn't super interesting to tell you what my plans are when those plans don't exist yet. I'm still in like the early stages of developing the big story that I'm trying to do for this comic. It's still going to be very stupid, right? It's still going to be very silly, right? Just by the proxy of it being more like action focused, right? Molly in an action show was very funny, but like, yeah, that's kind of just the future I want to do, but I can't talk about that because it doesn't exist, right? And I don't think a hypothetical is really as impressive as like, at the very least, the foundations of something that actually exists. So I guess maybe once year 2 of this video comes out, I guess hopefully you'll see the fruits of that. So I guess one thing I want to do as a way to like close out this video is just kind of talk about some of the lessons I learned from making this comic, right? I think the first thing I thought about, is probably just like making the stuff that you want to see in the world, right? Yeah, I think that's probably the thing that's helped me push through this comic, right? It's just that like, I want to read the comic, right? I think the comic is funny. I made a video about this, and I don't know how elegantly I explored this concept really, right? But like, I get really upset, right, about my traction on this YouTube channel, on social media. It definitely sucks, right? Like, sometimes it feels like I'm just kind of like speaking out into the void, right? And I think the food analogy I made in that video really helps, right? Like, when you make a sandwich, right, you're just making that for yourself, right? And you eat it, right? You don't complain about people not liking your sandwich, right? And I guess it's a different thing, right? We make art to have community with each other, right? But I don't know. I guess when I'm sitting here looking at my art in a vacuum, I'm a lot more proud of what I've been able to achieve when I'm not comparing myself to like, you know, other people who like make art and stuff, right? I'm really happy with all the comics I've made. In the past, I've made basically about like maybe 60 or 70 pages of comics, right? Back in the day, that would have been like a huge mountain for me to overcome, right? And it doesn't matter, like, you know, whether or not I get 2 or 3 likes or whatever, or I get 0 views or whatever. That can't deny the fact that I made like 70 pages of a comic in half of a year, right? I think that's a big achievement. I think I did something pretty cool, honestly. And I think the reason why I've been able to achieve that is just because I wanted to make this comic, right? And I read it, right? I read my comic all the time, and I think my comic is funny. So I don't know, I think it's really easy to just make stuff when you want to see it happen, right? You know, I think it's easy to look at it when it's like, instead of you having to wait for someone to make your new favorite show, you just make your own new favorite show. You don't have to wait for someone to make your new favorite comic. Just make your own new favorite comic, right? I think you can just do that. I like my comic. I think it's cool. Another thing too is it also just start, you know? For the longest time, like I said before, the start of the back half of the Headlice arc was just really challenging for me because I was really afraid of getting this specific moment wrong, because it's the part where like the story transitions from being this dumb ironic thing to something a little bit more sincere, right? And I was so afraid of messing that up, you know? So for the longest time, this comic just took a long time because of that, you know? But the fact that I was able to just get something down made it easier to start, you know? It's easy to fix something that's imperfect when you start it, right? Compared to like not doing anything, you know? It's just important to get started. Like, I've been working out a lot, right? I wouldn't say it's really gotten easier, right? But one of the things that has been trying to help me push through reps, right, is just recognizing that you can't go backwards, right? You can only go forwards, right? You can't go backwards and then you're just stuck there, right? It's not like you're Sisyphus or whatever, right? The minute you put something down on the paper, right, you've already gotten started, right? And so you just have to put something down so that you have a foundation to work from, right? That leads into my next lesson, right, is a good foundation. This is in regards to like my pencils, right? My favorite drawings in the comics, for the comics I've made and the pages and all the covers and stuff, are drawings that have like really good sketches, right? Just sketches that give me a good foundation on how to pencil stuff, right? How to ink stuff. And that means that when I'm inking something, it's not just me tracing the sketch, right? It's me like doing a completely new drawing with the sketch as a reference, right? But I have that solid foundation, so I think a lot of my drawings end up looking a lot nicer because I have a better understanding of how I want the comic to look compared to like some other comics where like, I don't know, I didn't have a good idea as to how I wanted the characters to look. So the drawings end up looking a lot stiffer and a lot less confident. And I think it shows in a couple of different comics. So I think having that good foundation, I think, is really important. Also scheduling, right? So I told myself I only want one comic a week, right? And so I gave myself an idea as to how many comics I needed to make for the year, right? For the rest of the year. I started drawing this in like June or something, right? Basically what I wanted to do was that I just want to try and get as much as I could get done within the year, right? And so I gave myself this is the amount of comics I need. I think I needed to make like 40 comics or something, or like 25 comics or something to have like one comic for the rest of the year. And so I did that, right? And because I have like stuff queued up, right, it gives me enough space to be able to say, hey, I can spend more time on this, or I can make more stuff and add it to the queue. Like, just having a queue, having a schedule is really important, right? Because it gives you space to be able to do stuff, right? So right now, I'm recording this like the first week of December, right? For my webtoon, my tapas, and then the main Tumblr site, I have comics queued up until March, right? So that gives me enough space to add to that queue, right? And also to make more stuff. Now that I'm going to be making more bigger stories in the future, I have that space to be able to do that, right? I also want to say that proper practice and observation is also important too, I think. One of the things I started doing this year has been doing more observational drawing. What I've been doing these 15-minute studies where I take like an outfit I'd see on Pinterest, right? And I try and recreate it in like 15 minutes. And it's given me a better understanding of anatomy and foreshortening and stuff, and also how I draw like clothing and stuff. And I think because of that, my drawings have been a little bit nicer, I think. And because I have that mental like library in my brain, I have a better understanding of how to draw things. In regards to the comic, it also helps too. I think by proxy, I think I'm way better at drawing Molly now than I was like a couple like months ago. So I think my early Molly drawings I think my later drawings of Molly are just a lot nicer, a little bit closer to a little bit closer on model, but also just a little bit more appealing, you know. I really like this like Super Mario RPG one I did a while back, and it just kind of helps because I've been practicing drawing Molly for a long time. I just drew that just straight up, like no sketch or whatever. Yeah, I also think the biggest thing too is that I think you should just allow yourself to suck, right? You know, the famous Jake the dog quote, the sucking at something is the first step of being sort of good at something, right? Yeah, that's kind of just like, I don't know, I think going in, I really lowered the bar on what my expectations were for this comic, right? I told myself, I just want to post something once a week, right? Some of these drawings really don't constitute as comics, right? They're literally just doodles, because I lowered the qualifications of what I want to constitute as a comic, like, I feel like I gave myself enough space to just practice, right? I told myself, what do I want to do, right? I don't know, I felt like I had the space to just, like, be able to just kind of like not be great, but to see myself grow, you know? My biggest problem with my earlier concept was that I was trying to make my big dreams, right? I was trying to make my big magnum opuses, right? And I had this whole expectation of trying to make it big, you know, be famous or whatever, right? Or trying to make something that everybody would love, something that can go toe to toe with like DC or Marvel or whatever. But like, I don't know, you're just, you know, you're just giving yourself too many like big expectations or whatever. I really think that like you kind of got to lower your expectations, right? And you give yourself room to grow, right? I'm honestly super happy with how the comic has been looking so far, and I'm really happy about how everything's been going so far. So yeah, that's kind of just the gist of this whole thing. I just wanted to go over my development of this comic, and hopefully sometime next year I'll be able to explore a little bit more about how the comic has grown. Maybe I'll even start another comic by this time next year. So yeah, if you want to read the comic, I'll have the link in the description below. I actually suggest going to the Tumblr site. You can ask me questions about the comic, and I'll like draw a little doodle. You also get really early drawings. Some of the on the sites like Tapas and Webtoon, they're not up to date yet, so their queues are a little bit slower. But if you want to get to see the comics a little bit faster, I would suggest reading the Tumblr site. And also, hey, if you like any of the art that I've shown off, if you like the art on my thumbnails, I'm definitely have commissions open, and you know, I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, if you're into if you're into Molly McGee discussion, if you're into animation discussion, if you're into art discussion, all that stuff, I really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. Thank you for watching for this long, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Okay, I love you. Bye-bye.